photography. Thank you. How did I get into photography in the first place? Well, when I was a kid, about 12 or 13 years old, my parents brought me one of those Kodak reflex cameras, which was the kind that you look down into and then you can take a picture. And I remember I had done a lot of reading of US Camera, which presented a lot of black and white photographs, and for a 12 or 13-year-old, a lot of nudes. But that, beside the point, was the photography that I was interested in. And so I started taking pictures, and I continued that. And then finally, in the year 2000, at work, I started to make greeting cards for people with my pictures on them, and they seemed to like that. So I thought, well, maybe I can sell them, which I began to do at places around the town. And it's also the time where the Cooperative Gallery was just opening up, was just founded. And so I applied for a membership and was lucky enough to get one. This was 20 years ago, and I was able to sell my cards and also put on exhibits. So that was important to me. What do I like about photography? I remember having a sort of an argument or discussion with someone one time that photography is not really an art, because all you're doing is using what's out there. You're just making a record of what's there. But of course, if you've done any photography, if you know anything about art, you know there's a lot more to it than that. One of the creative things that you can do is decide how you are going to compose that photograph, which is really what people see. So what you're dealing with, I mean, your canvas, is the viewfinder in the camera. So for example, Karen, there's a photograph over on the wall with a shell and some sand waves there. Now, in creating that photograph, there are a number of things I can do. The shell is where I want it, and it's right there with the curves of the wave, but I'm not sure it was there when I found it that way. In other words, I created and wanted to put it in that corner of the canvas rather than the right-hand corner, or rather in the center of the viewfinder. So there is creativeness, obviously, in photography, and I guess that's one of the things that I enjoy about it. Just to very quickly finally talk about one or two of the photographs besides the shell. Karen, if you could show the one in the middle here, the twilight, pastels twilight. That was a photograph that was taken up at Campobello Island on a twilight night, and it was getting dark. And as I remember, I decided to up the ISO of the sort of, quote, digital film that I was using. And what that does is that it actually softens things. And so that's one of the reasons why that photograph is very soft, which kind of goes against what a criteria people oftentimes use for photographs, was they want them as sharp as possible. And usually they should be that way. But this was a chance of creating something else. So we would love it for people to come down and see our exhibit. It runs through this weekend coming up and through the following weekend. So now I would like to introduce my fellow photographer, Geof Gould, and fellow member of the Cooperative Gallery 213, who will talk a little bit about what he has on the wall here. So Geof?
Thanks, Bill. Yeah. In contrast to part of what Bill talked about, the technique, I'm going to look at the work of two photographers, me and Scott Booker, who lives in Rochester and couldn't come down. And after me, then Bill Barbucheck will talk about two other photographers, including himself. But I started photography similarly to Bill when I was at camp in Minnesota as a 10-year-old. And I had a Brownie Hawkeye, and I remember taking a picture of people swimming, and then a picture of my little sister sitting on an old black Buick torpedo back, smiling sweetly. But I didn't do much photography in the years following that, especially when I was in the Army and they couldn't get near a camera. So we did have a lot of fun. But moving from Minnesota to New Jersey and then up to Binghamton gave me an opportunity to join a photo club of some pretty talented people, including Bill Barbucheck. And so the pictures that I will share were pretty much taken on vacations. And I'll just point out two of mine. One of a blind harpist, an older gentleman, that was taken on a trip to Peru. In fact, this gentleman was about halfway up to Machu Picchu, but he had a beautiful aura about him, and he was sitting still in contrast to the alpacas and all the rest. And I really loved the color scheme in that photo, and it was, again, nice because he wasn't a moving subject. The other one of mine comment on is right to the right of that, which is a picture taken in Yellowstone Park about 5-6 years ago. I took that picture from across a valley, so probably 200 yards between the camera and the waterfall. So it's a big one. And I'm not sure you can see the human beings near the very top of that because they are about the size of ants. My wife and I were lucky to have good weather throughout our stay in Yellowstone. And so we took many, many pictures. I'd like to shift now to the work of Scott Hooker, who is, like me, a former admission director at one of the SUNY schools. And he had 4 photos here. We'll just point out, why don't you stop right there, please, Karen? Took a picture of the night sky. And he told me that it took him about 280 clicks of the camera with a time lapse, click, and then stop. So he got, instead of a bunch of blurs, he had small segments of the moving stars and the night sky. And I believe took a separate picture of the landscape, which is a lake. The other one of his, I'll point out, is sunflowers. And Scott lives on near a farm south of Rochester. And so he has gifted his friends, including me, with images on Instagram and Facebook of many, many, many barns and sunflowers. This particular one, I think, is a blockbuster because he really gets very close. And that's one of the things. And he does a lot of night photography. Others of us do some night, but mostly day photography. And that's one of the labors of love that photographers enjoy. And those of us who are nature lovers feel very, very gifted. At this point, I'd like to invite Bill Barbucheck to come and sit up here and discuss his photos and those of another photo club member.
Just make yourself comfortable.
What can I say? You've all said it. It seems like the common thread that runs between the three of us is we were all introduced at a young age to photography. My aunt was a professional photographer, and I got all of her hand-me-down cameras and the old film that she didn't think was any good anymore. She would give it to me. I would take it and promptly ruin it, usually, because back then you didn't have autofocus, you didn't have auto exposure, you didn't have auto anything. You had to learn it from the ground up and memorize it. So it was a lot more difficult with film. But I don't think I would want to go back. I like my digital camera now. I am primarily a wildlife photographer. That is my joy. That's the reason I shoot to begin with. If you can't satisfy yourself first, nobody else out there is going to like your work either. And what I'm hoping to do is get people interested in the outdoors, interested in the animals that are out there. And the more interested they are in that, the more interested they're going to be in keeping those animals around and keeping the populations healthy. Locally, we have a huge diversity of wildlife. People just have no idea really what's out there until they step out there and start walking around and figuring out where all these animals live in our area. So what I try to do is bring some of the more interesting ones to film and consequently on the walls of galleries so people can see it, ask questions, and get educated. The more educated they are, the more interest they're going to have, and the better off we're all going to be. The two images that I want to show tonight are a little bit different style of photography. It's called high key photography. It was actually developed for film because film did not have the dynamic range that a modern day digital camera does. And they really couldn't record all of the range of light in a particular picture. I use that process to highlight the animal itself. There's plenty of negative space around the one on the left. You can also highlight an animal using negative space. There's nothing else in that image for you to look at. You have to notice that bird. And that's exactly what I wanted you to see. I didn't want you to see anything else. There's no sky in the background. There's no anything. Although technically there is sky there because all of that white is sky. Most people think that those are photoshopped. All they did was cut the background out and make it white. That is the photographic background of that picture. There's no Photoshop itself in that picture. They were sharpened, color corrected, things like that, but there was nothing artificial taken out or put in on either one of those. And people don't really see high key photography that much anymore. And it seemed to draw interest. And my high key section of my gallery is probably purchased more than any of the other ones in there. But really, if you don't love what you're photographing, people are going to notice. They're gonna look at it. The images are just going to be lifeless. So if you really have a passion for what you're photographing, you just keep doing it because sooner or later people will notice.
Yeah, so
what else do you want to?
What's the name of the technique again?
That's called high key photography.
HIGH?
HIGHKEY.
Ah, okay. Okay.
There is an opposite style called, well, people call it low key photography, but I believe the Italian word is chiaroscuro. So the background is black and the animal is featured lighter. I have a few of those. That technically probably the bird on the right there, Karen, or on the left, I'm sorry, the white bird, probably you could call that chiaroscuro only because the background is all blacked out. And again, there's no Photoshop to that. I was fortunate enough that the bird was in the light and in the background was a small lagoon that hadn't seen the morning light yet. So it was dark and it was easy to take that picture. No, I won't say it was easy to take that picture, but it was possible to take that picture. You couldn't do that in normal broad daylight. You would have to Photoshop it.
Right, right. So when you use the high key
Mhm.
technique, how is it different from taking a, regular picture? Is it all?
What you need, you have to have the right kind of day to do that. Your background, your sky has to be like a white, hazy, cloudy day. You can't have blue sky because it just won't work.
Mhm.
So your camera's exposure, it can only expose for one value. It's
Mhm.
either light, dark. It tries to get in the middle. But when the camera sees that white background, it says, wow, it's way too bright here. I have to darken down. So it darkens everything down to where the white looks normal.
Mhm.
Well, now the bird is going to be very dark because the bird is not very light.
Right.
So now I take the exposure, pull it back up, which makes the whites even whiter till I get the proper exposure on the bird.
Mhm.
It's easier than it sounds.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
How did you get those shot? Where are those taken?
I can't tell you.
The
Oh, yes, I can.
bird. Is
Uh,
the bird still there?
I can tell you that they were taken in Tompkins County.
Okay.
That's all I can tell you.
Okay.
No, there's a place in Tompkins County run by the Finger Lakes Land Trust called the Lindsay Parsons Biodiversity Preserve.
Mhm.
Just take that name and throw it away because it really doesn't mean anything. It's a wetland,
Okay.
and it was deeded to them by someone who it was on their family farm. They gave up the family farm. So basically, it's just these birds out there doing their thing.
Mhm.
Nobody bothers them. Anybody's welcome to go up there. But you have to know exactly where to go to shoot these birds the way they're being shot there. I believe those two high key and the one on just to the right of the high key one, those are all taken from that little wetland, and it's not a big wetland.
Mhm. Mhm.
So now that everybody knows, all five of those people that are out there are going, yeah, the birds will be all gone.
Yeah, well, I had a question in my mind, but it slipped out. What kind of a lens would you use for that? How far away were you from the?
I was a fair distance away. That was a 400 millimeter with a 1.4 teleconverter on it. So I was trying to reach out as far as I could.
Yeah. And obviously a tripod and.
Absolutely, a tripod with a gimbal head, because those lenses are, the lens itself was 13 pounds.
Yeah, yeah.
So you have to have a steady rest, otherwise they're just not going to come out sharp.
Right.
And when you get a lens that long and you're shooting that far away, just something silly like heat shimmer off of the water will affect your pictures.
Mhm.
Atmospheric haze, like the smoke we had last week.
Yeah,
Autofocus would barely work last week.
yeah.
That's how bad it was.
Focus on the fog.
Yeah, it will.
Yeah.
It takes everything from where you're standing to that bird and compresses it. So it just makes it worse, actually.
Yeah, yeah.
But those are the things you deal with when
Right.
you're outside. You have no control over the elements out there.
You teach photography?
I do. I give private lessons. We do workshops. I'm heavily involved in the local photo club, Two Rivers Photography Club.
Mhm.
Yeah, anybody that wants to, would like to go out on a trip like that, I'd be more than happy
Yeah.
to take you.
Yeah, interesting. Well, thanks, Bill.
You are more than welcome. Thank you for
Jeff.
having me here.
I'm talking about Mary Louise a bit.
Do I want to talk about Mary?
Yeah.
No, no. I can talk briefly about it. From what I can see, the picture of the buffalo is taken out in Yellowstone. She goes out there every year for a couple of weeks. She's got a thing for buffaloes. And she just loves being out in Yellowstone. That was kind of a cute one because there's a couple birds that are picking their dinner off the back of the buffalo. What else does she have?
And she.
Oh, she's got an eagle. That's another one of her pet projects is the local eagle population. She has two places that she has private access to. And you kind of need some kind of special access to that because they're usually hard to shoot. Usually they're out in the middle of nowhere somewhere and they're 60 feet up in the air. So it's very hard to get a straight on shot of an eagle like that. And that's another one where you're using a very long lens.
Yeah. Well, people who can ask questions on the chat box, if they would like to ask, Geof, myself, or Bill. And we have an audience here, and the audience can also ask questions. So do you have any questions for Bill or Geof or myself?
Good question. Bill, do you primarily work with wildlife and birds that you're?
I have two things that I really enjoy. Sports is the other one. We just got finished photographing all of the New York State high school championships. And one of the reasons I got into it, because it takes exactly the same kind of equipment. You need long lenses and fast cameras. But yeah, I was known as the waterfall guy for several years. I still enjoy doing landscapes. And the problem with that is when you're after wildlife, you have to be still. You have to sit there and be quiet. Well, landscape photographers are constantly changing their angle, moving their tripod over a little, adjusting things. The two of them are not compatible. If you're going to go out for wildlife, you go out for wildlife. If you're going to go out for landscape, you have to go out for landscape. But you'll fail at both of them if you try and do them both at the same time. Now I've taken just about every kind of photo there is. It takes you several years to really learn what you truly enjoy and truly enjoy photographing. You'll go through several different phases.
Right. Yes, in fact, I remember that you, I think, got first prize in the Bob Johnston Memorial Photography Show a few years ago.
Oh,
for,
yeah, that
gigantic
a few years ago.
films.
I'll bet you that was 10 years ago.
Really? Was it?
Yeah, I'll bet you.
My goodness, what happens to?
Yeah, that was a waterfall.
Yeah, I remember that.
I'm glad you remembered that.
And I don't know if we have any questions from our video audience.
My wife said she was going to send one in. I'm not sure if that's gonna work.
There's a question.
We do have a question. All right.
Okay, Libby from the audience would like to know what kind of photography all of you have enjoyed most doing in the Binghamton area.
What was that again?
Libby would like to know what kind of photography all of you have enjoyed doing most in the Binghamton area.
Okay, limited to the Binghamton area.
Well, 100-mile radius. How's that?
Yeah. Well, actually, I did a series of photographs of downtown Binghamton a number of years ago that I really enjoyed. Not necessarily documenting downtown, but using angles and things to create some more or less abstracts of downtown Binghamton. And in fact, that's what I really enjoy anyways, is finding the abstract nature in a viewfinder, and for example, some of these photographs here, the one maybe right to your left there, the geometry of that is something that I like, in addition to the color. But again, there's always choices you can make, and it's the choices that make the photograph. So those are my those are my Binghamton photo stories anyway.
Binghamton too, something there's sports photography and photography of carousels, and all of which we've done over the last few years, because it gives a sense of the heartbeat of the community, and it's a good community, as we know, in which to live a lot safer than someplace has a first-rate university that has helped educate teachers, not just art teachers, throughout the K through 12 sector of the community. And some of his richness I've found since leaving New Jersey 30 some odd years ago, because of the style of life and some of the beauty, but also the fact that, we really care about our children and their growth. And I think this area has lent itself to their growth, but also to our photography of them.
Yeah. You were passing the abstract there in the corner, and I was talking about Binghamton photographs. That's Binghamton. And what I was doing was walking downtown along the river, and the city, because he doesn't like graffiti, it's another thing I like to photograph is graffiti, but just parts of it and create a nuisance. Anyway, they paint over it with this terrible gray paint, which to me is uglier than the graffiti. So the background of that photograph, the blue and the other one, is the concrete wall that has been painted over by that gray paint. And the golden color in the top is another part, that is graffiti. And it was in a place that was right next to the Holiday Inn, again, on the river. And then what I've done in Photoshop is combine the two and make what I call a construction. They call it construction rather than collage just because it was from the city. I mean, it seemed to be, construction would be an appropriate word for it. But that's another thing I happen to like to do to create with Photoshop and create things that people hadn't seen before.
So do you create that for yourself? Do you
Yeah.
satisfy yourself first?
Yeah, I suppose.
It's always nice
Yeah,
to
yeah.
see your work on the wall. It's always nice to have people say nice things, but originally you have to like it yourself.
Oh, right.
All right,
Yeah.
another question from someone in the audience. It's not directed to anyone in particular, but Isold said, these are all beautiful photos. Do you find digital more creative than film?
Oh, boy. Yes, no, yeah, no. It's been a couple of years since I shot a roll of film. But I don't think creativity has anything to do whether it's film or digital, to be honest with you. Some instances, digital can definitely free you up. Look what, for better or for worse, look what Photoshop has done to our photography.
And I would add to that.
See, Geof, could you come up here? I want to make sure that you're here heard.
I would add to that, something that takes digital photography maybe further than we want. Photoshop's newest version is AI. So the question of whose photo is that really will become asked, I think, more and more, but it is an opportunity for careful people to add a creative dimension, just as a painter does to his or her work, and not to be bounded by four corners or by the old masters or particular, philosophy of art. And so I think digital photography has unlimited creative potential. The whole issue is, who takes credit for a particular image. That's a serious question.
Right. Well, the difference between film and digital for me is I was never a darkroom person, so I didn't have that kind of training to make anything.
Two of us.
People ask me all the time, do you miss the darkroom? And I said, what part of the darkroom would I miss? The smell, the chemicals on your hands, what? No, I really don't miss the darkroom. I didn't spend that much time there anyhow.
Yeah,
I was kind of, film was slowly working its way out when I really got serious about photography.
right. And with film, I mean, I would also have to give credit to Walmart. As the ones who, take the negative and make a picture. So digital now gives me that control that I didn't have to give over to them. I can-
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. So. The
Well,
other.
what else, someone else asked me if Ansel Adams would approve of Photoshop. And I said, absolutely.
Yeah,
He was a very creative person. He would make 40 prints, dodge and burn them until he got them exactly the way he wanted.
right.
He could do that without going into the dark room now, and he wouldn't have to burn all that film, or he wouldn't have to burn all that paper and all those chemicals and everything else.
Right.
He could just sit right at the screen and do it. Yeah, I think he'd have a blast with it.
Yeah. Well, I've told other people this story. We were out in California a number of years ago at the Getty Museum, I think it was. And there was a history of photography show there, which was really interesting. But, first photographs were taken in 1839, something like this. And this was a photograph in, I don't know, 1845. I don't remember the date exactly. But it was a very, very atmospheric photograph with a street lamp, and there was a mist in the back, and there was a wall that went back to, kind of vanishing point in the perspective. And it was just very full of atmosphere. That was 3 or 4 negatives layered together. Already in 1840 or 1850, people were playing with the reality
And
that
that,
photography would show.
right, that's high dynamic range photography right there.
Right, yeah. Well, yes, I mean, this was
Putting all those tones together, light to dark.
and the photographs of the wall
Yeah.
and the street lamp and the person who was there and the mist and so on. Yeah. So right from the start, people have been manipulating and playing with reality,
So then that maybe answers the question. I think they're both creative endeavors.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
May I just interject one sales pitch, if you will? This is a photo show that is either going to go home with the photographers or it's going to go home with you. So if you, as a member of the community or a member of our gallery, are interested in putting some really nice photos on your wall, or as has been the case in my family, buying photos as gifts for family members and not just mine. So there's an opportunity, come by again, where the show is still here until the 24th. So that doesn't end this evening. It's just a momentary pitch.
And just to give a pitch for the upcoming show in July, two things. One is wonderfully kind of playful and playful and whimsical small sculptures by John Thompson. They're so much fun to look at. And they're almost like little musical pieces sometimes where you have different elements interacting with each other. And so he'll be showing these. And the name of the show is, would you know that?
It's actually, I think it's mostly small.
Mostly small stuff, right? So John will be showing those. And in the other part of the gallery, we'll be showing summer art by the exhibiting and supporting members of the gallery. So come down, it should be an interesting show with a combination of the summer art and John Thompson's wonderfully playful little and intricate, that was the word I was trying to come up with, intricate pieces of wood sculpture. So I guess if there are no more questions, then we will say goodnight. So glad you tuned us in and get the word.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, guys.
And
Bill.
Nice job, guys. Very nice.
Nice job.
Yeah.
That's enough time. That's, 40 minutes. That's plenty. It's half an hour.
Should we
I
close
was gonna
this up?
pick on the AI idea.